Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the SIAS webinar this evening. My name is Wan Chen. I'm currently the Vice President for SIAS, and the topic today is stakeholder engagement. Extremely interesting topic because a lot has been written about it, but I think understanding of it has been low. And today's session is really to share with you the research that was done by Black Sun, together with the SID, SIAS, and the Singapore Exchange. And we hope to share with you some of the findings of the research and what it means to investors who are the main focus for today's webinar. The main person presenting the research findings today is Mr. Yap Ziwei, a director with Black Sun Global. The presentation will take about half an hour, 45 minutes, and followed by Q&A session through the Q&A chat session in the Zoom window. But along the way, if you have any questions, please do put them into the Q&A function. We don't have to wait to the end. And I will be interrupting the speaker as and when there are any urgent questions or interesting questions that we may have for myself or for the speaker. And without much delay, let me hand it over to Ziwei for his presentation.
Thanks, Wan Chen. Very good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this event that was organized by SIAS and supported by us at Black Sun Global. As Wan Chen has mentioned, today's topic is a really increasingly important one. It's about stakeholder engagement. And through the research findings that we will share, you will be able to understand a bit more about the stakeholder engagement efforts and the quality and impact of stakeholder engagement, specifically for Singapore-listed companies. Before I go in, just a bit about my company, Black Sun Global. We are a communications agency, and our main purpose is to really help our clients spark positive stakeholder engagement, which is why this topic is very close to our heart and very pertinent for today. These are some of our curated services in terms of disclosure and reporting, the annual report, sustainability reports. We also delve into stakeholder engagement and how you communicate with them. We also provide advisory around ESG and sustainability for the region, which is getting increasingly flux with the amount of reporting regulations. So do reach out to us at the end of this seminar before if you have any questions on this. So without further ado, let's talk about stakeholder engagement. Like Wan Chen has mentioned, this was a joint collaboration between SIAS as well as Singapore Institute of Directors, SID, together and supported by the SGX. And I would like to open with this very meaningful quote by Terence, the CEO of SID. The essence of what he's trying to say here is that effective stakeholder engagement is critical today as stakeholders demand transparency and accountability. Companies and their boards must consider stakeholder interests to build strong relationships and ultimately drive sustainable success. So why is the topic of stakeholder engagement so important now? And why have stakeholder interests taken center stage? On the screen here, you can see some of the topics that stakeholder engagement are starting to ask about of companies. You notice these are not easy topics to discuss. Stakeholders have become more empowered and vocal. They demand greater transparency, they demand accountability, and they expect ethical behavior from companies. And really, this shift is not just a passing trend. It represents a fundamental change in the business environment. As a result, companies, both in Singapore and elsewhere, they are facing increasing pressure to engage meaningfully with their stakeholders, and more importantly, to integrate their interests into decision-making processes. It's no longer enough to view stakeholder engagement as a peripheral activity or a box to check in corporate reporting. Instead, it should be approached as a core strategic process that can help to drive long-term success and build stronger, more resilient relationships. And if you bring this topic a bit closer to home, in a very recent news article by Business Times, it was announced that in a joint study that was conducted by ACRA and NUS, over 70% of large Singapore-listed companies, which is about 51 of them, with market cap over 1 billion, they are aiming for net zero emissions by 2050, which is very encouraging. However, as we dive deeper into the research, it was observed that only 53% of these companies with market cap over 1 billion, they did not disclose interim milestones towards their long-term climate goals of 2050. And that presents a problem because it is crucial for stakeholders to be able to understand what are your interim goals and targets, and then to track the progress and evaluate the effectiveness of your strategies in place that will allow you to reach net zero in 2050. So this is just one example of the importance of stakeholder engagement and the expectation of stakeholders in terms of visibility, transparency, and regular updates on what companies are doing. And ultimately, that will help to build and maintain stakeholder trust. So let's take a step back and think what exactly is stakeholder engagement? If you look at the Code of Corporate Governance provisions around the world, we will find many similarities when we talk about stakeholder engagement. For example, if you look at the corporate governance provisions for Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Philippines, and even further away in the UK, we notice commonalities in terms of what constitutes stakeholder engagement. So the key elements really for stakeholder engagement is first, communication. Companies are encouraged to maintain regular dialogue with stakeholders to keep them informed and involved. And the second key element is transparency, where there is an emphasis on being open and accountable, ensuring stakeholders have clear insights into company practices. And thirdly, engagement channels. How are companies engaging with your stakeholders? Companies are encouraged to create diverse and accessible mechanisms for engagement that will allow them to have easy and effective interaction. So with these questions and definitions in mind, we created a set of hypotheses based on our own experience with clients within the APAC region to really understand and find out how is the quality and impact of stakeholder engagement efforts in Singapore. Here we have the BEAMS Plus, which is what we call a Black Sun principles of stakeholder engagement. So in this BEAMS Plus approach that you can see here, there are 6 elements, hence the name BEAMS Plus. The first one is balance, which really emphasizes the importance of managing relationships with different stakeholders. Effectiveness is about effective and transparent communication between companies and its stakeholders. Accountability centers on the integrity demonstrated by companies in their interactions with stakeholders. Whereas materiality focuses on the identification, the prioritization of matters that are significant or important to both the company and its stakeholders. And then there's strategy, which focuses on the development of strategic frameworks for identifying, prioritizing, and addressing stakeholder needs and interests. And the last one is plus digital presence. So to address the growing importance of digital engagement, we have added a component dedicated to assessing the quality of a company's digital presence. So using these BEAMS Plus principles, we have developed 4 hypotheses, which I will go through in the next few slides. And we have also surveyed over 200 stakeholders within the SIAS circle, as well as some of the members from SID. We launched a survey to also understand what stakeholder engagement means to them. And that has allowed us to supplement our research findings. So moving on, we are going to unpack whether each of these 4 hypotheses, is it supported, not supported, or is it inconclusive? And if you would like to find out further great details, we have a report that is publicly available, which has all of this information. But for the purpose of this presentation, I will be zooming in on certain findings that I feel may be of interest to our participants today. So without further ado, hypothesis 1, companies comprehensively demonstrate the link between corporate governance and stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement, without a doubt, is a key component of corporate governance. and it highlights the crucial role of leadership in driving effective engagement. It is important to communicate how governance permits a company's stakeholder engagement practices and how through governance it's ensured that stakeholder needs are integrated into decision-making processes. So in our research, while many companies in Singapore, we found that they acknowledge how corporate governance and stakeholder engagement were linked, we found that many were still unable to effectively communicate how corporate governance impacts stakeholder engagement within their corporate communication suite. So through your annual report and sustainability reports, for example, or even through websites and social media. What we found that board or the leadership messages in corporate reports, they often acknowledge and recognize the importance of stakeholders, which is an encouraging finding. However, as we dive deeper into the details, we found that the corporate reports often fail to detail how the board or leadership is involved, be it when in the conceptualizing of our stakeholder engagement plans and strategies, or even down to executing some of these stakeholder engagement plans and strategies, beyond just a broad statement that states the board has oversight of stakeholder engagement. So if you see the stat on the right, notably, only 10% of companies included examples of how exactly their boards had considered stakeholders in making major decisions within their corporate reports. So one takeaway for participants here is that stakeholder engagement is the board's responsibility. If you look at the Code of Corporate Governance, this is explicitly provided for. And when decision making at the highest governing levels of companies are informed by a deep understanding and consideration of your stakeholders' concerns and needs, when your board is fully aware of what is going on in terms of who your stakeholders are and what are their concerns, this really sets the tone for the rest of the company. And companies will then be able to engage stakeholders effectively and create positive outcomes for the stakeholders that matter. So maybe now I would like to take a pause and have participants to answer a poll. So if the admin could pull up the poll here, we will have a minute to answer this question. So the question is, who do you think is responsible for stakeholder engagement? Though earlier I established that the board has ultimate responsibility, apart from the board, there's also senior management, the sustainability team, the corp comms team. Apart from the board, who do you think is responsible for stakeholder engagement? Let's give a few more seconds before we wrap up this poll and review the results. I think in the interest of time, you can end the poll, admin. Everyone should be able to see the results on your screen. So a quarter of you think that the board is responsible, but the majority believes in the senior management team. None have chosen the sustainability team, and another quarter have chosen the corp comms team. So like I mentioned earlier, in the code of corporate governance, it is the board, but ultimately stakeholder engagement, we believe it is a collective effort across various levels and functions within the organization. So successful stakeholder engagement really requires collaboration and coordination from the board, the senior management, to all the various teams and business units to create a cohesive strategy in terms of stakeholder engagement. But thank you for your answers, everyone. And if I may move on to the next hypothesis, companies are communicating with their stakeholders in the most effective manner. Ideally, companies should be acutely aware of the need for effective stakeholder engagement in order to implement the right practices, the most effective practices that will allow them to foster trust, to enhance reputation. What we found in our research was that most companies are in nascent stages in their stakeholder engagement journey. And they have started to do more to understand and meet the needs of their stakeholders. But there is still much room for improvement. Wanchen, sorry, you have a question?
No, I don't.
Right, okay. Sorry, moving on. So as I mentioned, we are at the nascent stages of the journey. So through our audit, we observed that most companies have made the effort to leverage different channels and processes to better understand, to engage with their stakeholders. But what we've also observed is that the smaller companies, the low market caps, have to play catch up as compared to their medium and larger counterparts. If you look at this graph on the right, where we look at digital presence performance, smaller companies are lagging behind the larger companies in terms of leveraging and maximizing digital capabilities for stakeholder engagement. These smaller companies need to have more effective use of digital channels in order for them to reach the right people in the right manner at the right time. And there's really a myriad of tools and channels that is at their disposal. We've noticed that smaller companies, they really mostly rely on the traditional platforms. They provide an email and a hotline. They have an annual report or sustainability report. But there's more targeted ways you can have stakeholder engagement. For example, having focus groups, workshops, marketing campaigns, or even a webinar like the one you're attending right now. Companies really need to think carefully and find the correct tools of engagement. And I think a fundamental first step before you find the right channels to engage with your stakeholder is to really understand, firstly, who your stakeholders are, and secondly, what are their needs and concerns. So as a fundamental first step, we highly recommend that companies consider and continue to conduct a materiality assessment. So this can really help companies identify and prioritize the needs and concerns of their stakeholders and ensure that whatever the company is saying or doing, it aligns with stakeholders' expectations. And in our research, we found that only 44% of companies surveyed have stated that they conduct a materiality assessment regularly. So this is an area that we hope to see an improvement next year. Moving on to hypothesis 3, companies balance the needs and interests of different stakeholder groups in decision making. Again, I'm going to call out the Code of Corporate Governance, specifically Principle 13, which involves stakeholder engagement. And it really underscores the importance of inclusivity. Companies should consider and balance the needs and interests of not just different stakeholder groups, but material stakeholders that are important to them. Only through this approach can the companies ensure that whatever decisions that they make will incorporate diverse perspectives and align with the company's best interests. In our research, we found that some companies engage more with certain stakeholder groups, which is perfectly acceptable given the unique circumstances that each company might find themselves in. Even for companies within the same industries, they may have different operational constraints, different resources available to them, different scenarios that impact them. And therefore, uh, the stakeholders that they have may also have different priorities. So, given how fluid and how different what is critical is that these companies, they must consider the needs and interests of all different stakeholders groups during decision making. So if you look at the graph on the right, most companies we audited seem to make more of an effort to engage with the community as compared to other stakeholder groups. Again, this is an encouraging sign. Uh, and we see this as possibly a maturing of sustainability efforts. Because of these maturing sustainability efforts, the maturing of reporting requirements, the maturing of how companies view CSR, this has allowed companies to really focus on community engagement that is relevant and applicable to the community. But interestingly, respondents of our survey mostly viewed investors as the most important stakeholder group. So there is some level of difference between what was conducted in our research and what is some of the sentiments on the ground within the survey respondents. We see that investors are the most important stakeholder group, and one potential reason could be that short-term financial pressures may compel companies to prioritize immediate financial goals, and therefore there is a need or pressure to prioritize investors and shareholders. What we can conclude from our research is the material stakeholders for each company varies greatly. So there's a lack of clarity as to what is an established set of stakeholders. And additionally, what the definition of stakeholders varies widely. And there's a lot of overlap. We cannot just view a stakeholder as an investor. An investor could also be a customer. It could also be an employee. So that's when the lines get blurred. But however, the key takeaway is that the importance and influence of stakeholders can change over time. So investors may be the most important stakeholder group now this year, but it may change due to certain circumstances and your changing business environment. So companies must be adaptable and shift their focus to different stakeholders as these dynamics unfold. And here I would like to pause again to have another poll. So if admin could pull up this poll. So the poll is asking, who is your most important stakeholder? So earlier we established that our survey respondents of over 200 people, investors was viewed as the most important stakeholder. But in your own experience within your own organizations, who do you think is your most important stakeholder? Let's give everyone a few more seconds to answer this question. And meanwhile, I think we have some questions coming in. So I think a question from one of our participants is, are regulators considered as a stakeholder? The answer is absolutely. The reason why we have these options here is because we wanted to select 5 stakeholder groups that were most represented across all industries. So regulators are definitely an important stakeholder, more so for industries like the financial industry, or for certain industries where regulators need to keep a close eye on company developments. And so they are an important stakeholder that needs to be engaged. But for the purpose of our research and for this presentation, we have selected 5 more general stakeholders that will apply to most industry. And I think we can end the poll, admin. Thank you. So everyone should be able to see the results. So almost 60% of you think that the investors are the most important stakeholders. So this is aligned with our results from the survey. A small group is quite balanced. I think the employees, community, customers are most important. I think what's interesting is that only a very few of you have selected suppliers as a stakeholder group. And this aligns with our results when reviewing stakeholder engagement efforts in our research across companies. We feel that the overall engagement of suppliers is lacking, and there needs to be more resources being put towards engagement with suppliers. Right now, we are observing the very standard way of engaging with suppliers is really companies providing a list of rules, a code of conduct as to how suppliers should behave and act within the boundaries of what is acceptable within the company. But often we see that it stops there. There's no further engagement to maybe understand what are suppliers' concerns, what are their pain points, how can the suppliers help them in terms of creating their products and services so that they can ensure that their supply chains are not affected. So this is an area that needs improvement. But thank you everyone for sharing your answers. And if I may move on to the final hypothesis, what constitutes good stakeholder engagement practices can vary across industries. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to stakeholder engagement, and companies must tailor their engagement strategies to address the specific concerns and expectations relevant to their own industry. In our research of over 80 companies, we have companies ranging from that come from more than 20 industries. And of these, the most represented was the finance industry, the real estate, as well as industrial industries. And when we took a deeper dive into these 3 industries, we found that actually different industries have very different stakeholder priorities, and which leads to different ways of engagement with these stakeholders. So, for example, if you look at this graph, the presence of customer surveys, we found that when engaging customers, companies in the real estate industry, they use customer surveys more than the other companies in the other industries. One possible reason for this could be real estate is more B2C focused, and it usually involves managing a large number of tenants or customers across multiple assets, multiple properties, and across various geographies even. And surveys then are probably the most efficient and effective way for real estate companies to engage with their customer base, especially if you think about them having fewer touch points as compared to, for example, banks in the finance industry, where a stakeholder can just walk into your bank and there's a form of engagement there. In terms of industry, we noticed that the industrial companies, they achieve the highest employee engagement scores, outperforming all the other industries or sectors. And really this emphasis on employee engagement really stems from what we think is the health and safety being a key concern in business operations as compared to the other sectors. And for finance, we noticed or observed that they did a lot more engagement with stakeholders in the areas of data privacy and security compared to the real estate or industrial industries. So they train their employees more, they engage them more on data privacy and security. They engage customers in these areas as well. And we believe this is due to factors such as higher level of sensitivity of customer information in the financial industry. There's higher stakes involved in the event of a data breach. It's a highly regulated nature of the industry. So regulators um, really want to make sure that there's data privacy and security and investors are protected. Uh, Across all industries, though, we did observe an encouraging trend of multi-channel stakeholder engagement practices. We see more companies tap on both traditional and modern uh, means of engagement to reach their valued stakeholders. I think one takeaway from this is that regardless of industry or market size, uh, companies must continue to leverage on their resources in order to maximize the effectiveness of their communication channels, their strategies. Ultimately, the outcome might look and should look different for different companies. But the commonality, the common thread between all these companies and all good stakeholder engagement practices is that at the end of the day, you are developing a relationship that is built on trust. So in terms of next steps, and I hope you found this preliminary findings are useful. So maybe I would just like to summarize. So while acknowledging the need for improvement among companies, we think that the future of stakeholder engagement, especially within Singapore, is one that's brimming with a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of potential. We see an environment that fosters innovation, where people care about sustainability, where it's important to build trust and enduring relationships for long-term success, and provides a very good landscape for stakeholder engagement. And with changing expectations, with the influx of technological advancements, with emerging trends, uh, it's an exciting world of stakeholder engagement. So the appropriate channels, the formats, the platforms for engagement will constantly evolve and will constantly change to adapt to these changes and the changing stakeholders. And we're also noticing more in terms of regulatory demands across various jurisdictions where there's an emphasis on stakeholder engagement beyond that of shareholders. So companies need to pick up the pace and really view stakeholder engagement as a core strategic process, as I mentioned earlier. And one final poll I would like to share with everyone is, what do you see as the biggest barrier to effective stakeholder engagement in your organization? Is it because of a lack of resources, technology, tools available to you? Is it because of a limited understanding or awareness of who your stakeholders are and what concerns them? Is it a lack of buy-in from the top? Or is it because there are competing business priorities and they are just more critical day-to-day operations or priorities that need to be focused on? A few more seconds for everyone to get your thoughts in. Okay, admin, could you end the poll? Because I'm mindful of time and for Q&A later. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your answers. So it's quite interesting to see there's a widespread of answers. So the pain points for everyone is slightly different. So be it the lack of resources, limited understanding, lack of leadership support, or competing business priorities, um, there's really no one biggest barrier. I think these are all areas where um, companies need to focus on. So I think it ties back to the first fundamental step, which is a materiality. So when you first understand who your stakeholders are and what keeps them up at night, it is a good first step to then decide what are the other areas what are the material issues to focus on, what are the areas that the company should be looking at. So thank you everyone. And to my last section, so I've shared with you the hypothesis and the findings. So here I've curated a list of hopefully insightful tips in the art of stakeholder engagement. So there's a more comprehensive list in our research report, but here I would like to summarize some key tips for each of the principles. So in terms of balance, it's really about creating a narrative that caters equally to your key stakeholder groups and engage them during your value creation journey. And it's also about highlighting your various engagement efforts for your key stakeholders. And in terms of effectiveness, uh, consider setting long-term quantifiable goals. It could be both qualitative or quantitative, that's tailored to each stakeholder group, and also one that aligns with your strategic priorities. And if possible, to include targets and KPIs so that we can track the progress of the effectiveness of stakeholder engagement. In terms of accountability, it's really about translating your commitments into action. And it can be as simple as articulating how feedback you have received from a specific stakeholder group was acted upon during the year. Again, materiality, prioritize key issues based on stakeholder input. Use the materiality assessment as a valuable diagnostic tool to understand the needs of your stakeholders and what they want to be engaged on as a first step. In terms of strategy, apart from having a well fleshed out stakeholder engagement strategy, it's also good to ensure that your leaders are involved uh, in the engagement processes and systems. So to involve your leaders as well as other key stakeholders to integrate long-term considerations into strategic planning. And last but not least, a digital presence. Understand your audience and how they want to be engaged on across your various platforms. Could be social media, it could be the website, could be through press releases, it could be through your annual or sustainability reports. What's important is you adjust your digital engagement and your content strategy accordingly so that you are maximizing your effectiveness of stakeholder engagement. Having said that, it's very important also to not overwhelm your stakeholders with too much information or excessive posts, especially on social media. With that, I would like to wrap up this session. Our research is a evolving one. Is evolving alongside the landscape of stakeholder engagement. So this is something that we are continuously refining and expanding. So hopefully we would like to broaden the scope for next subsequent research on stakeholder engagement. We will continue to update and research on emerging trends that are relevant to stakeholders and to refine the set of questions and surveys that we will be conducting to flesh out this research further. And with that, I think it's very prompt to wrap this up with a quote from Wan Chen. So when effective stakeholder engagement, when you have clear comms and we have a strategic and well thought out public relations plan in mind, great things can happen. And with that, I think we can move on to Q&A.
Thanks very much, Ziwei, for the presentation. While we're waiting for questions from the floor, why don't I start with a question for you? What do you think is I mean, you've seen the responses from the poll, but in your own personal view, what's the biggest hurdle to preventing companies from effectively engaging with their stakeholders?
I think the answer for me personally is leadership needs buy-in into stakeholder engagement. I think traditionally stakeholder engagement has been viewed as something that is done as a tick the box exercise. Is something that's done by the corp comms team or the sustainability team. But really what will elevate the stakeholder engagement efforts and impact is really when your board understands the importance of stakeholder and your board expresses their interest and desire to engage with stakeholders, and then to substantiate that with proof points and case studies of how your board is exactly engaging with stakeholders. Because I believe on a certain level, all companies, the board does have some form of engagement with stakeholders beyond the traditional, the AGMs, the investor days. There are other forms of engagement, but we're just not seeing them disclose this in be it in their annual reports, on social media, or on their websites.
Okay. And follow-on question, Zoe, what would be the first thing that you would do if you were the participant this evening, having seen your research and presentation? What should they do, let's say on Monday, next week?
So the first thing, I think even before the materiality, conducting a materiality assessment is to really do an internal exercise to sit down and within your own team or company is to identify who are your most important stakeholders, who are your material stakeholders, and perhaps conduct a stakeholder perception study. What is the profile of the stakeholders? What is important to your stakeholders? And if you can do it through a formal process like a materiality assessment, I think that's a key first step to any good stakeholder engagement practices. Because if you don't even know who your stakeholders are, or you think you know who your stakeholders are, but they may have shifted in importance or significance or relevance, how are you then able to effectively come up with your corporate strategy or your engagement plans to effectively engage with your stakeholders?
Thanks, Zoe. And what are some of you've seen annual reports? A lot of them have a table in a section called engagement with stakeholders. Any comments on those tables that you've seen?
You're right. This is an increasingly common way of disclosing stakeholder engagement efforts. It is a good start because it gives a comprehensive or a bird's eye view of who your stakeholders are, how often do you engage with your stakeholders, and how companies are engaging stakeholders. I think it's still good to have this in annual reports or sustainability reports. But what I would like to see companies specifically for annual reports or sustainability reports is to really let the stakeholder voices be louder, to really show that they have made an effort to engage with the stakeholders. So what I mean by letting the stakeholder voices be louder is disclose things from a stakeholder-centric point of view. It could be as simple as including testimonials, including quotes, including success stories or case studies of some of these various engagements. And then to really tie it to the fact that you're not just engaging for the sake of engaging or just to fill up that table in the annual report, but that you are really engaging because you want to make sure that your business strategy, your value creation aligns with the expectations of the stakeholders. I think that's what I hope companies will do more in order to elevate their disclosure within their reports,
rather than just a table.
rather than just a table. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Couple of questions from the floor, Ziwei. One from Victor Cherian. Is this a model that can be adopted in Singapore? The Japanese style of engagement, which is driven by activists. So I would think that activist investors, meaning that investors with a strong voice.
I think that's like why SIAS is about, right? We want to ensure that everyone's voices are heard, including the louder ones or the softer ones. I'm not too familiar with the Japanese model, but I believe that any model needs to be applied in the right market context and the right circumstances. But if the principle of the approach that is being adopted by the Japanese is to ensure inclusivity and to ensure that all voices are considered and heard. Why not? That's definitely something we can explore.
Activists, of course, not banging on tables and protesting in the streets.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it needs to be a meaningful form of engagement, right? And if you're banging tables, it's not really a two-way kind of engagement or communication.
It's enrichment, not engagement.
Yeah.
Another question from Anchor Lai, where he postulates the yearly audit on stakeholder satisfaction. Would this not be a good step?
To reward or punish companies that fail to develop stakeholder engagement. Yearly audits. One of the points we raised was to set quantifiable targets or KPIs to track progress. I'm not sure if a carrot or stick would be a good solution, but definitely if companies are more upfront on how they engage with stakeholders and the quality of the engagement and disclose those targets or KPIs and performance, that will really help create a better stakeholder engagement culture, as Anchor has pointed out. So then someone will ask, so how do you effectively measure? So it really depends. For example, if you're real estate, and I earlier mentioned that customer surveys are being used greatly. So customer satisfaction surveys is one metric that can be tracked. Other things that can be tracked could be feedback from customers on products and services. There's feedback mechanisms will also vary based on your industry. So it's really about how you collect the feedback from stakeholders and how then effectively communicate that and allow people to track your progress.
And what would be the reward for good stakeholder engagement? I mean, is there a guarantee that the company will make more money, be profitable?
I think that's a very Singaporean question, but to answer yes and no. But I think because it's subjective, right? But I think what's most important, like I mentioned earlier, is you get to earn the trust of the stakeholders. And I think that is something that is, I know it may sound corny, but it's priceless. Because stakeholder trust is something that you build up through maintaining relationships, by creating quality products and services. It's something that is slowly built up over the years. It's also based on how you act, how you have ethical behavior, in the way you act as a company. So yeah, I think that's the key thing.
Thanks, Sui. We've got about 10 minutes left to the webinar participants. If you have any questions, please do post it on the chat, on the Q&A window, and we have 10 minutes that we hope we can answer them.
I think one question that may not be asked would be, is there an international framework or standard for stakeholder engagement? Apart from it being stipulated in Code of Corporate Governance, there are international frameworks out there specifically focused on stakeholder engagement. One that comes to mind is A1000, specifically A1000 Stakeholder Engagement Standard. And our research is really built upon the foundation or the guiding principles provided by A1000. So within them, they focus on inclusivity, also materiality, as well as responsiveness. So that's a publicly available piece of document that will allow companies to understand how to track the quality and impact of stakeholder engagement. And it acts as a good base to develop your stakeholder engagement strategies to ensure that it's transparent, it's authentic, and you have the impact that you want.
No more questions from the floor? Maybe so you can mention to us the how many companies were covered in the this research and how many questions you asked with regards to the research?
Yeah, so we had a total of 100 questions. So the 100 questions were based on the BEAMS class principles, but there were also stakeholder-specific questions. So the 5 stakeholders that was on the poll that everyone saw earlier, we also had stakeholder-specific questions related to those 5 stakeholder groups. So we had 100 questions. We then benchmarked this against 80 companies, which is a mixture of industries and different market cap sizes.
How was the sample selected, these 80 companies?
So these 80 companies were derived from the Singapore Governance and Transparency Index. So every year, the SID and NUS, they will conduct an audit of how companies are faring in terms of governance practices. So there's a ranking of all listed companies in Singapore, which is publicly available. So what we've done is we've used that as a base, and we've taken the top 20 scores for large, medium, and small market caps to make up 60. And the other 20, we took the lowest scoring for the Singapore Governance and Transparency Index to make up 80 companies. The reason why we did that was we wanted to not just focus on the top performers. We wanted to make sure that we have a good representation across industries, performance, and sizes.
Okay, thanks. Oh, it's 7. I think we got one more question from the floor. Most companies' culture is shaped from the top. If the CEO is focused only on chasing monetary returns and neglects stakeholder engagement, what can the staff do to bring change?
What can the staff do to bring change? I think that's where engagement comes in, right? There needs to be buy-in. Ultimately, the CEO answers to the board, so it's really the board's responsibility to ensure that all stakeholder needs and wants are considered, and that includes the employees. So I think one way is the company has to encourage open communication among colleagues, both from the senior management down to the business units, the importance of stakeholder engagement. Another way I would imagine is companies need to propose and develop initiatives that focus on stakeholder engagement, specifically engagement with employees. So doing so, I think if you can have such engagements, activities, you can produce tangible outcomes that can then perhaps help shift perceptions. So let's say you do an employee town hall where and like-minded colleagues group up because they believe in the importance of stakeholder engagement. Together, they can amplify their voice and present a united front to ensure that the CEO understands their perspective of the important things that are material to them as employees. And then hopefully the CEO will consider and understand and listen to them.
Okay, thanks, Survey. One more question from the floor. Got a couple minutes left. The report is available for download. All right. With that, I give you back 4 minutes of your time. Participants, thank you very much for attending today's session on stakeholder engagement. If you look at the codes of corporate governance for Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Hong Kong, UK, did I say Malaysia? Yeah. They all talk about the importance of stakeholder engagement and how it's a key part of corporate governance. There's a lot of write-up on that, but yet I think there's still a lot to be done in terms of disclosure and also the actions coming from stakeholder engagement. So lots to do, but certainly doable. And with that, let me thank Zhe for your time in the presentation this evening. And on behalf of SIAS, thank you participants for coming on this evening. Thank you.